Let's move on to a similarly idiosyncratic but much less dense movie. In Marc Lawrence's Pigs. And I have 1973 as my release date.
Yes.
I just took it from Letterboxd, so I'm not sure where Letterboxd got that from, but we're
no, I think that's actually correct.
Okay, cool. And this one, Letterboxd describes that the owner of a roadside diner and his new helper kill people and feed them to pigs, which, that's fair. That's a fair way of describing what happens in this movie. It really oversimplifies it, but
well, it's funny because it's like a monster team up between the guy that feeds corpses to pigs and then the woman with a tragic backstory that murders men.
Yeah, well, it's like two different facets. I just thought of this right now. It's two different facets of what we see. Ed Gein on film. She's like the psycho facet, and he's like the deranged or 300 meat hook facet.
That's funny. No, you're right.
I just thought of this right now. I just had something about the way you worded that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you think about it as like a film that's going to be about rampaging killer swine, like a Razorback kind of movie, and it's really kind of closer to like What You Came From the Sea, as far as like the woman's kind of responding to sexual trauma, in a sexual abuse, in a homicidal kind of fashion. Like, it's closer to those kind of stories, Miss 45 or something.
Yeah. I mean, the oinking, grunting threat of pigs. Well, first of all, they're too cute to be threatening. All the shots of the pigs trying to look scary, they just look like curious, hungry pigs. They're adorable. But so they're connections to eco horror and killer animal movies. But the pigs are really the sound is representational. It's their murderous instinct. It's the humans' murderous instinct. The pigs are just the graveyard where they bury the bodies. But there are some scenes where the local, like, they feel like they're gonna go into that territory where the locals, like, oh, he feeds pigs and the pigs take on the humans. They're the ghosts of humans inside those pigs. But that doesn't really go anywhere. That's not really meaningful in the movie.
It depends on the version you see. Because
cool. Okay.
Because I feel like in the director's cut, the idea is that when the pigs eat people, they become pigs. Which is not something that you see in every cut, because this one has like several different versions that are quite different. Like, it was one of those films, like an Al Adamson type thing, where he was shooting new scenes and kind of like it just evolved into all these different kind of permutations. Because this one has like a dozen different.
I wrote down some of them here. The main alternative title is Daddy's Deadly Darling. That's the one you're most likely. But it also is Daddy's Girl, The 13th Pig, Blood Pen, Horror Farm, Roadside Torture Chamber, The Killer, The Killers, Lynn Hart, The Strange Love Exorcist, which is weird, and then Lynn Hart, The Strange Love Exorcist.
Yeah, and the Strange Exorcism of Lynn Hart.
Yeah, and then The Secrets of Lynn Hart. So a lot of the titles are really pushing her as the central. Like, they're kind of giving away the game. It's not shocking when it's revealed that she's killed somebody, but it's still a bit of a twist. It takes a little long.
Depends on the version you watch, because I mean, the version that I saw first was the version that Troma used to distribute, which was, I think, the Daddy's Deadly Darling cut. And that opens with her killing somebody and then like taking their nurse's uniform. Oh,
this cut, she already has a nurse's uniform.
So in the director's cut, she already has it.
Yeah. So I just assumed she was a nurse.
No. I mean, but it's a totally different beginning.
Interesting.
And, but it reveals her to be a killer on the run in a stolen costume. So that's not a twist in the version that was the only version you could see until Vinegar Syndrome restored the Marc Lawrence director's cut in the Blu-ray era.
It's interesting because the pigs version that I watched, I got the feeling that it was sort of subverting expectations from Psycho, where she is a girl on the run and we don't really know what her crime is necessarily. And then she stops at a roadside place off the beaten path and stays there. It's not a hotel, but she has a place to stay and sleep. And there's a scene where the owner, who we know is something's up with him, comes in and kills her, but that's revealed to be a dream. And I felt like that was Lawrence's way of teasing audiences that were like, oh, she's Janet Leigh, she's going to die early on, and then we're going to get a new protagonist. And I really read it as the tease specifically in that way. And then not too long after that, she's revealed to be a killer too. But this is because I had never seen the movie. So it's interesting that there's a completely different version of it where all that tension is gone, and all of what I read as sort of subversion might just not have anything to do with anything.
No, what you're saying is accurate. The version that you used to be able to see had an opening where an elderly neighbor catches Lynn murdering her abusive father depicted in a silhouette. And then Lynn's conversation with one of the doctors at an institution, and then she escapes using the nurse's discarded uniform while the nurse is having sex with somebody. So that's how it originally opened.
That's shockingly close to how Michael Myers escapes during Halloween.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's how it originally opened. And then what you're describing as far as like the nod to Psycho and then flipping it is what he's doing.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the only scene that's unique to Mark Lawrence's version that wasn't in the version that I had seen first was the scene where he menaces the nosy neighbors in that kind of grease paint and like almost like an eerie, like a carnival figure.
Yeah, he's some sort of like magician or clown. It sort of goes by the wayside after that.
Yeah, that scene was not in the version that you used to circulate.
Okay.
And I think now it's going to be a case where that version that was like the blood couple, equivalent for Ganja and Hess is going to probably be harder and harder to see, as people discover the film in greater numbers on Blu-ray and the director's cut. But I think it's interesting how you're not sure who you're afraid for initially. Is she going to kill is she going to kill the man, who runs the, is she going to kill Zambrini, or is Zambrini going to kill Lynn? Like, you don't know, but then they develop a kind of odd father-daughter kind of relationship. Like, it's not sexual. It's just kind of like two lonely monsters becoming friends with each other and like teaming up. And he's like, and it's even funnier because it is like, it's his real life daughter playing that character. But so that, the father-daughter dynamic is kind of like maybe something I read into it just because of who's playing those parts. But I think, it's kind of a sweet monsters teaming up kind of dynamic. Like, you're rooting for them. Whereas like the nosy neighbors are pushy, would-be suitors to Lynn, or even the sheriff, the Jesse Vint character, you don't really root for them to solve the murders or, break up the feeding of these pigs.
Yeah, she's likable and he's pathetic. So you kind of like him.
Yeah. I think what I thought of the Lon Chaney Jill Banner dynamic in Spider Baby, which is another film where,
father-daughter thing too.
Yeah. And people like getting killed off in an obscure little roadside kind of, house, I guess. But Lawrence shoots his daughter a little overly sexualized a couple times, but there's not like sexual tension between them, so it's not too disturbing. I think he was just knew that's how you sell a movie. Yeah. Well, no, I'm not saying that she isn't sexualized at all in the film. Yeah. I'm just saying that like that dynamic between the characters, you might think that that's going to be where they go, and it isn't where they go.
Yeah. And it also reminded me of like, it didn't remind me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it did remind me of Eaten Alive, the follow-up to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in the beginning when he's more of a disheveled murderer who he feeds his victims to a pig instead of a crocodile.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, it reminds me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre only in that the sound design is occasionally quite bold for a film like this.
There is one shot that reminded me a lot of the famous swing shot in Chainsaw Massacre. There's a really good shot of her walking towards the pigs that follows her on the ground, looking up at her. That sort of reminded me of the shot under the swing in Chainsaw Massacre. It was like it's not as virtuoso, but there are scenes like that throughout the movie. They're like, okay, yeah, he's going for something a little more complex visually here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is similar in that it's like a morbid roadside cafe that's using dead bodies for food, but it's not being fed as barbecue to people. It's being, fed to pigs. But
and he's not the absolute, like the guy in Eaten Alive is like such a mess, such as like mumbling to himself and just like unknowably weird.
Well,
Whereas
Zambrini
this guy
is mumbling to himself also, but yeah, he's not like he's definitely like a more lovable character than
you've met people like him in your in your life. You've met people like Zambrini. You've never met people like the
Jed.
guy Jed. Yeah.
No. Pigs is definitely like a less brutal kind of film than the Hooper films, but it's probably not a million miles away from that type of movie.
Yeah, wait, which where was this one shot? This is East Coast, right?
This is West Coast. It's Lake Piru, California.
But the music, you mentioned the sound design, which is really good. The music is by Charles Bernstein, who is not a member of the famous Bernstein family. But that will come up in a little bit here.
Yeah, but he did do music for Nightmare on Elm Street, so he has some horror cred.
And the title track, which is called Somewhere Down the Road, fucking rocks.
I want to say Kayla included a record of that with her House of Psychotic Women when it first came out.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, see, I have a used copy, so I that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, it's such a good song that it's another one that if this ends up being two parts, I'll use that one on the other one. This song and Love Me Deadly. Like it was, sometimes it's hard to find a cool song to put at the end as an Easter egg, but this time we got two really good title tracks to choose from.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to just say that Marc Lawrence was a former Communist Party member.
Yeah.
And he had testified before HUAC, naming some of his fellow actors like Sterling Hayden and Karen Morley, Jeff Corey. And I always wondered how much of the Zambrini's kind of isolated, kind of paranoid, guilty kind of quality, is meant to be some way of expressing the guilt that maybe Lawrence had for his own past and, trying to kind of just isolate and move beyond it. But I don't know if it's like...
Well, I think a lot of the 70s horror that's good is very tuned into politics. And I was trying to make notes, and I don't think... I mean, My Brother Has Bad Dreams has Vietnam stuff in it and World War II stuff in it. But this one, I thought I was looking the whole time for something when I knew that he was blacklisted, though it seems like he was actually blacklisted for naming names, so he couldn't find people to work with, even more than officially blacklisted.
Yeah.
But I was looking for that. And I do think that the townsfolk's putting together a little vigilante posse to get him, and the sheriff trying to stop them and saying, like, there's actual murders we need to solve. We can't just go around killing people. That was what struck me as maybe him expressing some of that.
Yeah, well, he made a film that is kind of even more obscure than Pigs before this, called Nightmare in the Sun, where a man engages in infidelity, and then he's the victim of a series of false accusations. So the whole community kind of turns against him, and so there's again that sense of paranoia about the community that Pigs also has.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, more in a noir kind of way, whereas Pigs is more horror.
I should say something about like his Marc Lawrence's past is that he's one of these guys that also he's not to be confused with the guy who wrote Miss Congeniality and Did You Hear About the Morgans? There was a split second where I'm like, whoa, did that guy get his start making exploitation movies in the 70s? That's awesome. The totally unrelated guys. This guy is a character actor, and he's been in movies since the 30s. And a lot of people know him because he was in both Diamonds Are Forever and The Man with the Golden Gun as thugs. But he has a super duper thug face. And so for me, he was, I recognized him because he was on Deep Space Nine. Mm. And I realized doing this podcast and realizing this, the character he plays on Deep Space Nine is a gangster on the holodeck. And I realized this whole time he looks so much like Marc Alaimo that I thought that was Marc Alaimo, because you know how in Star Trek sometimes when they go into like the holodeck or into back in time or something, there'll be bad guy actor will be out of his alien costume playing a different bad guy. I thought the whole time it was him. So he's it wasn't him the whole time. I thought that this was just like, oh, they're being clever. They're using the main villain who's usually in alien makeup as this violent gangster, but it was a completely different and much older actor.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was very strange. They do look very similar as far as their faces.
Do you remember Mark Lawrence, the film that he was in that we covered last time?
Shit. No. Which one was it?
He pops up in Dream No Evil when she finds her father.
Yeah.
And God, it's just part of like the strange dream logic of that story that like he shows up and takes her to like when he finds her. When she finds him like at like a home for older men or whatever, I can't remember the details.
That's right. Yeah.
But no, it's a fun little cameo in Dream No Evil. But yeah,
this movie has a little in common. Lynn has a little bit in common with the character from that movie, minus the supernatural powers. They sort of have similar things going on.
Yeah, there's daddy issues all throughout these films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is probably this, I mean, is it this or which is the heaviest daddy issue thing? Is probably
Love Me Deadly.
Yeah, we have to stick with Love Me Deadly because she's making out with corpses. She has such heavy daddy issues.
Yeah, but it's going to come up in most of the films we're talking about after this too.
Yeah. I also want to say that Jason Vint, who plays the sheriff, he was another person I recognized. And I was like, oh, I know him from Earthquake and Little Big Men. But it's actually because he's in the Corman-produced alien ripoff Forbidden World, which is probably my favorite alien ripoff.
Oh, I know him from Macon County Line.
Yeah, you know him from a real movie. I know him from the movie where the guy from Repo Man feeds his cancerous organs to a ripoff monster of the xenomorph.
Yeah, I used to mix those two up. There was the two of them, right? Horror Planet.
Yeah. It's the much cheaper, worse made one, but it's the one I prefer.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen it, but they kind of blur together in my head. I just remember them being like cheap alien movies with like a lot of like uncomfortable sexual violence. Yeah,
this one doesn't. Yeah, that's maybe another reason why I like Forbidden World more, is because it doesn't have the slug rape scene.
Yeah,
but it also has the walls of the ship are as soon as someone points it out to you, you can't not see it. The walls are covered with Big Mac, the old styrofoam they used to use.
I do remember that. Yeah.
This movie, I should say, it's on both Prime and Tubi, and it looks nice. It still has Trauma branding at the beginning, but I think that must have been a deal that Vinegar Syndrome made with Trauma, where they would all the movies that they were doing that they would still get branding at the front. But it's definitely the new transfer.
Yeah, it's definitely like a great little sleeper that I think again, this is one that I think Nightmare USA really kind of helped find a whole new audience, and it was probably one of my favorite discoveries that I hadn't seen before. Stephen Throw wrote a whole love letter to it in the it didn't give it a chapter, but I mean he definitely writes about it with a lot of affection in the in like the I don't know what you call it, like the review section towards the back.
Well, I remember confusing it with Scum of the Earth because of the Daddy's Deadly Darling cover of the old VHS that I saw. It's for some reason I was confusing it with all those
the SF Brown rig.
Yeah. And so in my brain, it was one of his movies. And then I actually sat down. I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with him. So something happened where from the VHS days, those things got tangled up.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. No, it's probably Barnes in both, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose. All right. Next, we got Hollywood 90028. And this one is another one that I have as 1973. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, the only one we're covering this episode that was directed by a woman.
One of two.
We got one more. Okay. So this is Christina
Hornisher.
Hornisher is also known as Insanity. And that was the title on the print I watched.
Yeah, it's also known as the Hollywood Hillside Strangler and also known as Twisted Throats.
Twisted Throats is a good one. I don't know really what that means, but...
Well, this was a last-minute addition because I think we had talked about maybe covering Ghosts That Still Walk, which is maybe worth talking about another day. But I watched a couple of films that I thought like maybe could be like one that was new to me that I've wanted to talk about. I watched a few things from this period that were all interesting, but this one really blew me away. And I know that it's got like this renewed reputation because of Grindhouse releasing, touring around this restored version. And I know it will come out on Blu-ray eventually as well. And I know that it screened at the New Beverly, like it's getting some renewed attention in recent years. And I thought maybe this would be a fun one to talk about with you, because had you seen this one before? It was new to me.
This is the one I had never even heard of.
Okay.
This one was completely off my radar. I don't know. Is it covered in Nightmare USA and I just overlooked it?
It's mentioned in the like index of films from the period, but it's not one that he writes about.
Yeah. No, this one, I feel like Invitation to Murder was my favorite, but this one also like really stuck with me. And in fact, it was one where I finished watching it. And, I put those scores on Letterboxd and they're kind of meaningless. And I remember I gave it 3 stars. I'm like, I thought that was good. And then I thought about it and I bumped it up to like 3.5 stars. And then the next day, I think I bumped it up to 4 stars because it kept with me. And it's kind of it's similar to My Brother Has Bad Dreams, that it takes a long time to get going for me. But this was a case where once it got going, it had me, with it. Totally. So I really enjoyed it. And I would love to see a better looking version of it.
Well, it exists now. I just don't know when it'll come to people's homes. But I know that it played like Stitches Film Festival not too long ago. So I know that it's making the rounds as a rep title.
Yeah, Grindhouse tends to take their time on things, sometimes for good, but sometimes it's a little frustrating.
Yeah, I think the next one that Grindhouse I know are working on is Scum of the Earth, the SF Brown rig, which
it's been forever. I didn't even know where Impulse came from. I don't remember them even talking about that one.
I knew that was coming. I knew that
was, it was
like one. So because when that William Griffey box set came out, that the 2 big titles that were missing from it were Impulse and Stanley, and I think Chris Pajali might have told me that Impulse was in the works. With Grindhouse, even then, I mean, they do take a long time to put things out. So, but their releases are always
really good,
phenomenal whenever they come out. So, I know that in the case of, this is a total digression, but since we mentioned Brown Rig last time we talked, I mean, I think the book that David Shulkin has been working on SF Brown Rig will be included with that release. So he's the guy that wrote the book on the making of The Last House on the Left, and so I'm dying to read his book. So, I mean, I like that movie, but I'm dying to read his book. So I'm more impatient to read his book than I am even in having a good version of Scum of the Earth on high definition. Although I am happy to finally have that on a good transfer as well. But there's more I can say about that one, probably off the record. But back to Grindhouse and Hollywood 90028. So this was one I heard chatter about, and then I went into it with some high expectations because I was hearing everyone saying, "Oh, this was like a discovery of the year," and it lived up to the hype for once, because that usually doesn't happen for me. But it is a slow burn, and it's another one where it's like on the verge of falling outside of horror and into some kind of psychopath character study kind of thing, because it opens with a grindhousey kind of situation where a killer takes a woman home that he meets on the streets, and it actually feels more like a New York movie than any other
well, like you were talking about the difference between New York porn or West Coast and East Coast porn, like it really just feels like a grotty porno film at a certain point, and then that gets that turns into
but that's even film. Like the subject matter. So
right, exactly.
So first read the Letterboxd review, and then I'll hear the synopsis, and we'll talk about it.
So this one says, a young man goes through life detached, alone, and unable to control his psychic desire to kill the things he loves most. Employed as a cameraman in a seedy porno operation, he spends his days separated from the shame and degradation by the camera he uses to record it. When confronted with the reality of actual sexual encounter without his camera for protection, he invariably strangles his partner during a lovemaking process. But then he meets a girl, and the nightmare begins.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I mean, you can probably tell, I mean, right down to the fact that the character is named Marc, maybe it's a nod to Peeping Tom, although Peeping Tom was not exactly a film that was in wide circulation in 1973, but I mean, it did exist. So maybe it was an influence. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to not.
It's so similar. Like it would be weird if there wasn't at least some.
I think you're connection. Right, but I mean, it was obscure enough that it's hard to assume it as a matter of fact. But it is very close, so it may have been the influence. But so it opens with a scene that could feel like out of something like Maniac or like any kind of like films where like the serial killer is the protagonist and takes a woman home and the sex turns homicidal. But then it kind of gets into like the mundane reality of his life as the cameraman on these porno kind of photo shoots. And it's about like him being kind of trapped in that world, like unable to go legit, and like everything around them feels kind of desolate. Like it's a film that it's a California Hollywood film, but it feels like such a wasteland that they're in, other than the cities that congregate around like nudie shows and porno films and like sleaze. So it's definitely. It has a quality that reminds me of what I like about like East Coast psycho movies, like Maniac or Don't Go in the House, but it's totally a California movie. I mean, right down to the title. It's an LA story, but it has that same kind of guilt and sexual dysfunction that you might associate more with East Coast kind of films.
Yeah,
but it's about like, and then the woman that he is kind of drawn to is also trapped in that world because she, is, somebody that started off trying to have like a legit acting career and is like trapped in the film, the adult film world as well. And these are not actors that I really knew. I mean, he's, played by Christopher Augustine and she's played by Jeanette Dilger. I think the only name I even maybe recognized with the camera operator on this was Jean-Pierre, I don't know how you say it. Is it Guenans? I don't know, but
I'm even worse than you at this, so we'll take yours.
Well, but he was he was a cameraman on Lamora, not the director of photography, but he was an operator on Lamora, and so he has a connection to one other, arty 70s horror film from this period that we have talked about before. But yeah, it's interesting because like again, it's like kind of like Ganja and Hess in that he's targeting. Like it seems like he's targeting hippie girls. So like it's I don't know if that's again like the way that Hess is targeting like working class or lower class kind of sex workers and women, like poor people in Ganja and Hess's victims. Like here he might be targeting free-spirited drifter types that are countercultural. Like he's preying on people, not necessarily like sex workers, but he's preying on people that might be like less likely to have parents go searching for him.
Was it Richard Speck that or Hillside? I can't remember. There is a serial killer that I think they were basing him on.
Oh, I don't know. Richard Speck is the one with the nurses, I thought.
That's right. Hillside Strangler, maybe? I can't remember.
I mean, the Hollywood Hillside Strangler is one of the alternate titles, so maybe.
Yeah, so I think that was like their very, very loose inspiration, real world inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's an exploitation movie in the fact that it has a lot of, naked women and murder, but it's kind of, I mean, even with the sexuality of it, I mean, the adult photo shoots are being directed by this guy named Jobel, played by Dick Glass, that he's like almost like this parody of the pervy male viewer that you could imagine. So it's like it's not a flattering portrait of like male prurient interest or whatever. So no. I don't know that it almost is like kind of like satirizing or not satirizing, but like critiquing.
It's definitely a woman's perspective on it. I think that makes it very interesting.
Yes,
is that it's a woman's perspective on it, even though a man is the main character.
Yeah, and she takes a male pseudonym for the writing credit, but not the directing credit.
Yeah, interesting.
I don't know. Well, but
to me, it felt later 70s. A lot of it reminded me more of stuff like Taxi Driver in its approach. It's like if it was made in 70, it wasn't released until 76 is what I have here, and then it was re-released in 78. It fits 76, 78 better, a little easier. There's something a little ahead of its time about the way it approaches a lot of stuff, I think. And it's another one of those kind of hard for me to articulate what I exactly mean by this, but there's just something about its nature and its look. And I really like the scenes where he's actually shooting the porn loops and how clinical they are, and how it reminds me of like a Dario Argento movie when you're like seeing how things work, like in Bird the Crystal Plumage, when we're seeing him take pictures of victims, and we're kind of like it's stuck in the inner workings of the camera and the way the camera works and the way we'd see through its viewfinder and stuff like that. But different than that, it's hard for me to quite explain what I mean by this, but there's just something about its approach that feels like just like maybe 4 or 5 years ahead of its time in a lot of the stuff it does visually.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny if you bring it back to Love Me Deadly, you know, it is another film that like, you know, has the kind of like the tragic kind of backstory told in like, was it told in still photos in this one? Like,
yeah, which reminded me a lot of the way Peeping Tom has the tragic backstory told with 8mm home videos.
Yeah,
like that was another thing that really stood out as Peeping Tom-esque to me. But this does it during the credits, and sets pretty music to it.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a film that doesn't like have a mystery component, although it has a shocking ending. Like it has elements of surprise, but it doesn't. There's no disguising who this guy is or why he's this way. You know. I actually was reminded a little bit of Punch Drunk Love too, in that he has like all these nagging sisters.
Well, I was going to say the way that the porn loops are being shot reminds me of that first scene in Boogie Nights where they're showing the sex scene from the viewfinder, and just like that scene's more elegant. Yeah. But I was reminded of so I had Paul Anderson on the brain too while I was watching this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to spoil every detail of it because I assume that people are still kind of catching up with it, but it's, I don't know. I mean, I think if you go in expecting horror set piece scenes, I mean, it has some murders, but it's, I mean, I would say that the horror component is less than 10 minutes of it. Like it is more kind of like this dark character study and relationship story that has these serial killer element. So maybe that's why it struggled to find the audience that, you know, was going to see a psycho killer movie. But I think it's, you know, a buried gem worth discovering. And I'm glad that this is going to have presumably a great special edition from Grindhouse releasing whenever they can finish that release. But, you know, it's there is a VHS rip under the alternate title Insanity on YouTube right now if you can't wait. But I mean,
it does look really rough, and this seems like a movie with some nice cinematography in it, or at least cinematography that contrasts the porn loops with like the actual world of the movie. Yeah, it seems like something that might have been lost in all the grit of that VHS rip.
But, yeah, I think I forget who it was. It might have been Alexander Heller Nicholas compared it to 5 Easy Pieces in places. Like, I mean, as far as like,
well, I have a note here saying that there's so much of it that reminds me of 5 Easy Pieces is one of the ones I wrote down for myself. Is this a movie where if you took out the killer element and just made it a movie about a guy with artistic ambition who can't break out of the porn industry, it's just like a new Hollywood drama. Like it could be a Hal Ashby or Robert Altman or even a Bogdanovich movie. And I could see the lead just being Jack Nicholson or maybe Peter Fonda if you took out the horror element. And that was what ultimately was super interesting to me is that we keep talking about made for TV movies that get perverted and attacked by horror movies. This is like a new Hollywood, culturally hip drama that keeps getting attacked by a horror movie.
Yes, no, it's true. I think I wanted to give a shout out to a blog post that I read called Christina Hornisher, Alone with That Obscene Image of Yourself, from Marc Edward Hoyk. His blog, The Projector Has Been Drinking. This has like a ton of information about her whole life and career, which I'd never heard of her before, discovering this film. So I'd urge anyone that's curious about this film to read that blog post, which is, has her whole story and like her short films before this and just what her life was. It's pretty interesting. And I hope that more people, talk about her work. Cause I mean, it's kind of one of those, I mean, of all the one and done kind of horror films that we're talking about from people, like this is one of the ones that feels like, oh, what could she have done had people responded to this at the time?
Yeah. And, I think that I was talking about earlier trying to find the politics in these movies. This is one that almost makes fun of politics. There's this scene where there are scenes, I should say, where the killer discusses things, and he has very progressive opinions on the economy, and it's sort of it's sort of like, well, when he's a killer, if it wasn't a killer movie, that would just be his character. But knowing he's a killer, it sort of is another connection to Maniac with the way he talks about things, or even like American Psycho, the way he talks about the things he cares about. Only this, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that was kind of where my brain went.
That's interesting. I mean, when I saw those scenes where he's talking about like his disgust with how these great old antique homes are being torn down and replaced by large empty modern apartments, that felt like it might have been something that Christina Hornisher really felt concerns about, but it also it kind of creates this impression that like it's a desolate kind of environment that they're in, that like they're surrounded by like these large empty buildings. Like they're on all these like sand dunes at the beach, or like it's just like it just feels like weirdly underpopulated for like a major city. Which Marc said is very different from New York, whereas New York, I mean, Travis Bickle might be alone in interior, sense, but he's surrounded by people all the time,
constantly, right?
Whereas this character really, he's able to kill so freely because he's in isolation. I mean, he's able to kill in broad daylight, and it's not a problem because he's like, he can be isolated so easily.
I have another note here that doesn't really feed into that, but I did note
my point there. What was your note?
My note was that there are elements of it that reminded me of the Valley of the Dolls, like it's sort of the way it deals with LA and Hollywood. It was sort of like it reminded me of what Valley of the Dolls, like there could be a version of this that was a melodrama like Valley of the Dolls instead of what it really is.
Yeah. Well, that's, a trope that you find in a lot of films with me, as far as like
it's just what you do with Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like half the films that deal with Hollywood deal with like the tragic, efforts to become recognized in movies or television or whatever, and it's brutally competitive. And this one, the
spookiest scene in the whole movie is just this walk through LA with the killer and his girlfriend, and they're just sort of talking about life, and it's just like you were saying, the super barren backdrop, and they'll just kind of flash a couple frames of nude women. And to me, that scene really like went from being this sort of sweet scene between this couple to just really feeling awful. Like I started to feel like dread come in during that sequence. So yeah, that goes to your whole thing about it being so unpopulated and desolate.
Yes. Well, because it's that threat the entire time. You don't know when he's going to snap again, because there's long stretches where he seems like charming and affable, and can he can converse in ways that Travis Bickle cannot. Like he's not like Eric Binford in Fade to Black. Like he's not like socially maladjusted in that way. Like he can talk the talk. Like he can seduce women. Like he's not. And maybe in that way he's more like the Ted Bundy type of serial killer, I guess.
Yeah.
But like the fact that it kind of skirts that line with like kind of contemplative, emotional character romance kind of film moments, but just with this dangerous character. It creates an interesting tension. I can see how if you go into it expecting thrills and chills, it's going to be a little different and maybe unsatisfying on that level. Although I do think it pays, to hang in there. It has a gut punch kind of ending, but I don't think it's just a film that builds towards that ending. I think the whole thing is kind of compelling.
And I want behind the scenes. And again, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I want behind the scenes on how they shot that. That seems like an incredibly complicated shot for a low budget movie to pull off.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to know that Grindhouse is covering it because I'm sure that will at least come up on a commentary track or something.
Yes, no, I'm sure that they only put out one film a year, but it seems like they only do perfect editions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was such a nice. I mean, not. I went into it with high expectations, but it was still like a relief to finally see it and agree with all the praise that it's been receiving as a revived cult item. So I think when it's easier to see in a good transfer, it'll be one of those movies like Messiah of Evil that just picks up fans at like a rapid pace, even though it's nothing like Messiah of Evil, but like other than just like it was a quality film that was never treated with any kind of respect in its time. I mean, this one I never even heard of, and the other titles seem to only seem like, you know, what, like Ray Dennis Steckler type things, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's nothing about Hollywood Hillside Strangler that suggests an art film.
Right. So let's move on to the last one I have 5 of these I had never seen before.
Okay.
And this is The Bride, is what I'm going to, also from 1973. And this is directed by Jean-Marie Pélissié.
Jean-Marie Pélissié.
Pélissié, sorry. Oh yeah, there's a little dash over it. So yeah. Pélissié. This is also his only movie. This is a one and done or two. And it is AKA, and this is how you're going to be able to find it on Letterboxd, I think, is The House That Cried Murder, but also known as Last House on Massacre Street, and a pretty blatant attempt to cash in on Last House on the Left.
It's a little subtle.
And No Way Out is the other one I have here.
I also found a newspaper listing for it as Here Comes the Bride.
Oh, that one's not bad. It's also, you don't confuse it with the 1985 movie,
Sting movie.
The Sting movie that's Bride of Frankenstein with Sting and Jennifer Beals.
Yeah, no, it's not like that.
Which I remember thinking, why is this in House of Psychotic Women? And then I read, oh, it's different, The Bride. Like, what is it about that Sting movie that appealed to this author? But anyway,
yeah, and although Jean-Marie Pélissié didn't direct other films, the writer and producer of it, John Grissmer, went on to do Scalpel and Blood Rage. So this is the film that has connections to other horror films that come later that are probably better known. I mean, certainly Blood Rage is sure better known.
And this is available on Blu-ray. But I was kind of in a hurry and I didn't realize that, so I watched the VHS rip on YouTube.
Okay.
But now I know better. So I might not have gotten the whole gist of it, but I got enough. I think I got enough.
All right. So what's the Letterboxd description?
Oh yes, Letterboxd description: neurotic and newlywed Barbara finds her husband in bed with his old flame Ellen. Barbara doesn't get mad; she gets even. Using funds supplied by her wealthy father, the scorned bride turns the couple's love nest into a dungeon of horror. That's an okay description of what happens in the movie.
Yeah. This was one that I think I saw it as The House Cried Murder originally on YouTube. And
that's the version I watched.
yeah. Although it looks much better in the Last House on Massacre Street Blu-ray transfer.
Yeah,
was it
Code
Red or Scorpion? I think
it was Code Red originally. So okay. Maybe Kino has it now. I don't know. So this one opens like a horror movie, and it has a lot of soap opera elements in it. Like, it feels like all of his films, the John Grissmer films, feel like to some degree or another soap opera melodramas to me. Even Blood Rage, I think, has a fair amount of that. But Scalpel, especially, and I wrote the booklet essay for Scalpel. So I interviewed John Grissmer about his 3 movies when I wrote that booklet. And so he told me a little bit about how this one came to be. But it essentially was based on the house that she's building. Because I think they were trying to get a movie made called The Golden Gate, which is why it looks like a Golden Gate Films production when the credits open. It was a company formed in the early 70s with Lawrence Luckenbill, the actor, and Jean-Marie Pélissié and Grissmer. And they were trying to get this French novel adapted into a thriller, The Golden Gate. And they had decided to do kind of like a warm-up movie to, get some experience and to, hone their chops as filmmakers. And so The Bride was undertaken kind of with that idea, like, let's make a low budget film that's commercial enough to make its money back. And but what ended up happening with it was they got involved with Bryanston Releasing and Bryanston Releasing,
film fans would recognize as the company that handled Deep Throat, but also the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and so the mob connections. And what ended up happening with this one is that the lab bills went unpaid, and so when they kind of pushed back on it, the negative was destroyed. So this is not something that it only exists in like prints that circulate now, but which is kind of sad. But and actually there's scenes from it in Blood Rage, now that I think of it. I think they're watching it on TV at one point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's interesting because it starts off like with the Robin Strasser character who's like engaged to this kind of aloof guy that's shades of Death by Invitation, her employed by her dad. And but then when she walks in on him like making out with an ex-girlfriend at the wedding or at the reception, she becomes a threatening character, and then it becomes his story. So it's a weird switch from the character that you might think is the protagonist to the heel as now the guy under threat. So then it becomes like a case where he's being menaced. And I think if it has a flaw for some people, it's that like you're not really rooting for this protagonist.
No,
but I still find it kind of works in a way.
Yeah, it's probably the one movie we've covered for any of these where the neurotic woman at the center of it is unlikable. Like, I feel like most of these movies know to make the main heroine a sort of likable in some way. Like, and this woman goes like way off the rails, like shooting for the rafters, over the top acting in the scene where like she just turns on a dime. It's not like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, where the poor woman is being slowly psychologically driven to this sort of fright that she's experiencing. It's just like it really does feel like one movie ends way too quick. Like there's like they feel like there would have been like a whole hour long movie or hour and a half long movie about this couple's bad marriage falling apart, but instead it all happens on the wedding day, like 20 minutes into the film.
No, it's a really unusual structure. Like I never quite, I say this with affection, I never quite find my footing with it because it kind of switches gears to different types of feeling. But I love the location of it so much. Like I love the, that house. I've been trying to find that house for years. I don't know if I assume that it's not standing or somebody would have posted, photos of it. So it's like it is, like it was unfinished when they shot it. So I don't know if it was built into something more traditional looking, but I love that as a representation of her inner, her inner thoughts is like this kind of eccentric kind of structure. Yeah, no, I think it has like really effective stalking sequences. Yeah. And it has an ending that I find kind of quite chilling in a way.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's like it feels like a sort of corny twist ending, but when the way it's executed is pretty good, I think. Yeah, it could have just been. Is it Brownrigg who does Don't Look in the Basement?
Yes.
Yeah, it could have been a Don't Look in the Basement style twist, but it's more than that.
Yeah, although Brownrigg is not completely like a million miles off. Like
no. Otherwise,
it does feel like the New England Brownrigg in some ways. Because it does feel like like a little like theater troupe made it somehow. Yeah.
It also did that dreamy thing that you talked about at the beginning of the podcast. It does get there eventually. Eventually, it starts out pretty literal and just slowly sort of turns. I think that I don't necessarily think someone needs to remake this movie, but I think that a modern take would be to spend even more time in the idea that the house represents her psyche, it's just a concept I really like. That's in The Relic, the movie about where like there's a sort of contagious dementia that gets into the house. That idea is really cool to me. But I just don't think that they don't have the time or patience to go into that in this particular film.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about it to me is that I think because I like the threatening character in it, that I can't tell. I don't know if I asked John Grissmer this directly, but I think that we're meant to kind of enjoy the pranks and the threats that are like taunting this character, and like that's the meat of the movie. So it's a really weird structure in that way, because it's not about likable characters being picked off one by one. It's like the heel being kind of tormented by the jilted ex. But
I guess it's a little Fatal Attraction-esque. I hadn't realized that, but it's kind of what that movie's going for.
But Fatal Attraction is about how the horror is the domestic family being threatened by this unhinged woman. So it's maybe not the most progressive.
Instead of just a bachelor who cheats on his wife.
Yes. Whereas like, yeah, you don't like this guy. And so, I mean, you might feel sorry for his girlfriend, who's actually a face people might know, because she went on to do a couple of George Romero movies after this. Eva Jean Serenci. She was in some of the 70s Romero films, I think. Yeah, I mean the guy Arthur Roberts, who plays David, the kind of caddish husband. I mean, he's never really portrayed as sympathetic, even when he's undergoing this series of start with like threatening phone calls, and then it's like deliveries to the house, and then there's like stalking at night, and it's kind of like eerily depicted. So I don't know. It's such a quirky construction that I don't know if it's an easy film for me to recommend to people, but I've always really kind of liked it.
No, I mean, I enjoyed this one. This one didn't feel too slow or anything to me. It really, like, how long is it? It's got to be 85 minutes. It felt even shorter than that when I watched it. I was guessing it was like 70 minutes long.
Well, did you ever see Scalpel?
I don't remember if I have. I've seen the other movie called Scalpel.
Okay.
But no, I don't think I've seen Scalpel.
I think Scalpel is John Grissmer's best film, but it's the one that it's like the missing link between. I mean, Blood Rage is more fun at a party because it's like this kind of wild slasher movie, but Scalpel feels like Obsession from De Palma, or like Cronenberg, or especially the Almodovar film The Skin I Live In. Like it feels kind of like this perverse.
What's the Japanese film called? The Face of Another? There's a Japanese film that's
the guy that made the Woman in the Dunes. Yeah.
I like that one a lot.
I like that one a lot too.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it seems like it's my kind of subgenre anyway. So I should definitely look into it.
But Scalpel is similar in that it feels like this kind of like morbid daytime serial. And it has like these the soap opera, like the jerk pursuing family wealth, and it has like this incorporation of like Dixieland jazz music, and like just like all these kind of quirky touches that feel like personal. Like, I mean, John Grissmer was not a horror guy, and he went on to write like a Civil War novel, and like do plays, and like he's not like someone that comes from like a genre movie kind of sensibility. So like when guys like that make genre movies, like they can sometimes like have these other details that just come from another set of interests that don't come from horror movies.
Yeah. And they're so far from the cliches and stuff.
Yeah. Now I know he loved Brian De Palma. Like, I mean, he did like thriller people, but like I think it was just a lot of these films feel like people that haven't studied all the rules of what horror movies are supposed to be, and so they bring in things that just feel fresh if you've seen 1,000 horror movies, because they're not all from the genre movie playbook, and this one has like a lot of things that may or may not feel like horror movie directions to take, but they kind of just give it like a sense of character, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what people like us are looking for from genre movies anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I could say the same thing about spaghetti westerns. I watched hundreds of them, and so many of them are the exact same thing, that when you stumble across one that people don't really talk about and it does something interesting, it's super exciting.
Yeah. Like I wouldn't say that all the films we're talking about today are like equally successful artistic achievements, but I think they all have elements that I think are peculiar that kind of make them stand out to the point where I thought grouping them together might make for a fun talk.
Well, and then this one has two people who went on to be artistically important people. The composition, the music is Peter Bernstein, who is a member of the Bernstein family with Elmer and his son of Elmer, brother of Gregory. We had the other Bernstein from the previous film, a couple of them. Yeah, not related. This one is related. And he went on to do Ghostbusters is the one I think a lot of people orchestrator for Ghostbusters. Sure. And then he has these, to me, this really cool drum and guitar stuff that reminds me of Goblin when they were before like the one album they made before they were soundtrack guys. It kind of reminds me of their version of Yes. Like Goblin was trying to be Yes, and this guy was like, it's really cool. And then the other one is the director of photography, Stephen Barham, is Stephen H. Barham, who you mentioned De Palma. He became a De Palma collaborator.
Oh, that's
at a certain point.
Well, the DP on Grismer's second film, Scalpel, is also
and the DP on Scream Bloody Murder.
That's hilarious. Well, the DP on Scalpel is Ed Lachman, who went on to shoot like all the Todd Haynes movies and the Sofia Coppola, and he went on to be like a major art house figure. But also Herzog also.
Burnham's credited on Mission Impossible, Untouchables, Carlito's Way, Body Double, Snake Eyes, Casualties of War, Raising Cain. He's got some good, the Shadow, and then there's this. But he was one of two cinematographers, I should say that. The other one was Jeffrey Stevenson.
Okay.
Who only has this and the Howling 2 and A Breed Apart. So maybe most of it was shot by that guy, but still, that's pretty impressive and pretty funny.
Impressive. Yeah, no, I mean, this is one I don't know. Like, I mean, I think that this one is a good afternoon watch, but also like a good late show kind of movie. Mm-hmm.
I
think that they were even thinking about television sales even when they made it, because I don't think
that makes sense.
I don't think it has any explicit sex or violence. So I think that even at the time that they were shooting it, they were hoping that it could have a crossover appeal in a way that maybe some of these other films were like less concerned about.
I realize when I said earlier about the Hollywood 90028, when I was saying about its approach to politics, I realized I was thinking of this movie. There's a scene where a bunch of people are young people who are younger than I guess he's the protagonist, are chatting about their religious and social beliefs, and they just sound absolutely vapid. And then later we see a guy parroting those exact things he overheard to try and impress a girl.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is the one I was thinking of that has this really refreshingly cynical take on politics. It wasn't the other one. And so I messed up. I was conflating those two, this scene from that movie. I had it backwards.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a political aspect to Grismer's thrillers, but I think, they're definitely like buried subtext if they are.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think of his films as like great soap operas. I think I told him that, but like, not in a bad way. Like, I mean, just like Douglas Sirk with a higher body count.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah, that's all I really have in this one. I didn't have a lot of notes for it.
Okay.
It's just a short and sweet movie.
Yep.
So then the next one would be Axe from 1974 by Frederick Friedel. Friedel. This is one I had seen before, and this goes by a couple other titles. The big one was California Axe Massacre, which is how I saw it originally on its old big box VHS rental, which is supposed to sound like Texas Chain Saw Massacre. But also went by Lisa, which I believe is the intended title.
Yeah, it was shot as Lisa, and then it was acquired by Harry Novak, and so it's gone through like I think The Virgin Slaughter was another one, and the Axe Murders.
We could have a whole episode on Harry Novak and his way of doing things.
Yeah.
So
I think
I know Friedel does not like Novak just from the Blu-ray extras.
No, I don't know like what would have happened with this film had it come out as Lisa, because, well, first, before we even get into it, like what is the description on this one?
Oh yeah. So this one is described by Letterboxd as A group of 3 criminals on the run from the law go about terrorizing the local townsfolk of a small community before descending on an isolated farm, which is the home to a young girl named Lisa and her paralyzed grandfather. After being sexually assaulted by 2 gangsters, she retaliates using an axe and razor blades, which is sort of a shot that seems foreseen kind of like, I mean, yeah, you could describe the movie that way. That is what happens.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really give you what's going on. This is a uniquely disquieting film is the way I would describe it.
Yeah, well, I would say that, like, had they not called it Axe and had they not sold it that way, I mean, it's a film that, like, switches genres, and, like, you never get that feeling because you've gone to see a movie called Axe, because it's one of those films like From Dusk Till Dawn that starts off like a crime thriller, and then it shifts into gothic horror, but, you know, you're waiting for it, you know, with all the ways they've kind of sold it as a killer movie. But no, I think I think both of Friedel's 70s movies that and these are films that I came to know through the Nightmare USA. You know, I think I'd never even heard of Axe before. I mean, it seemed like such an anonymous title that even if I had come across it, I probably would not have remembered it. But I think they're both really interesting, you know, quirky, atmospheric little movies. I think that Axe, I mean, you've got to settle into its rhythm. I mean, it's one of those films that has like really long credit sequences to like stall for time because they made a film that was too short. But then once you get into the action, it has like almost like Romero-ish kind of like cutting rhythms in the opening scenes. And then
its runtime is listed as only 68 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. Like it's barely a feature. And having seen it on a double bill with Kidnapped Coed, I mean, it comes like it's the right amount, it's the right length for those two back to back. No, I think that this one, it's funny because like I think that the film he made after this, Kidnapped Coed, is my favorite of the two. But it's
more of a it's more of a movie. It's more of a story.
But it's harder for me to bracket it as horror. So I thought that Axe made more sense to talk about for this show. But they're both
and I was
available.
already a fan, so
What's that?
I already wanted to talk about Axe because I quite like it. I think that it's funny that it went by California Axe Massacre when it should have been the one that implied it was a Last House on the Left movie, because it's much closer to Last House on the Left than Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, completely agree.
I've always assumed that's what Friedel had in mind, was Last House. Or at least if he didn't have that in mind from the beginning, that's where he kind of ended up.
That could be. That could be. I never heard him describe it that way, but you're right that it has a lot in common. I think there's another film coming up on our talk that also reminds me of Last House, even more so. But yes, I can definitely see that. I mean, I think the home invasion, rape, revenge aspect.
That the fact that we get to see them being criminals on the run for part of it. There's even more of that in this one.
And it's a trio of men. One of them is more sensitive.
One of them's a sensitive one. Yeah, exactly.
One is more of one is more the hard-boiled leader, but they're both pigs, in different ways. Yeah, no. And I think that the Last House villains are meant to be as much kind of hard-boiled crime movie people as they are like Manson hippie type, degenerates. I mean, I think that just how the casting kind of gives them that kind of countercultural feel. But this, I interrupted you. What were you saying?
Oh, no, you didn't. No, that was the thing, is that I'm not a huge fan of Last House on the Left, just as on its own merits. It's not quite my thing, but it's one of those movies that led to a bunch of movies that I find interesting because of the ways they tried to do what it did. And this is one of my favorites. The best one is Late Night Trains, the Italian film. Which is just, I think, a good movie in general. But I just like, it's a formula that I like. It's like Alien. I love watching Alien ripoffs. It's a formula that I like watching people play with. And so I think this is a really interesting one because it's someone who doesn't have a lot of experience making movies, and it's someone who I don't think has all the footage he needs for some scenes. There's a lot of those early scenes of the criminals doing stuff that it just feels like they're missing footage. I mean, obviously they don't have footage of the guy falling out the window because that's a hard stunt to do on no money, but they're just other shots that just like, oh, something was missing there. and it's very. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, but the part of the reason this movie has remained in the horror community discussion is because it was on the Video Nasties list.
Yeah.
And this isn't an original thought of mine. Basically, everything I've ever read or seen on the subject thinks that a lot of Video Nasties were chosen because they were related to another movie that they wanted to ban, in this case, Last Times on the Left, but also because they were made by such unprofessional people that the censors were disturbed by the lack of structure and stuff.
Also, the Video Nasties targeted films that could be repeated at home. So anything with a household item like an axe,
implements,
that would be, or razor blades, or anything that could be like found by a child or an emotionally disturbed audience member, like that could be found about the home. That would be that could be a target as much as like any kind of resonance with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which wasn't a Video Nasty.
Right. It never got its way through. It was never officially censored. It was like tied in red tape or something like that.
Last House was, though.
Yeah. And I mean, Last House is a shocking movie, so it's one you can understand. But this one is just, it always felt like this is something they don't know what to make of it. It's not. There's certain movies on that list. They're like for instance, the Jess Franco movie. I don't know if it's called. It goes under so many names. I think Monster Hunter is one of its names.
Okay.
It's like a cannibal movie, but without the cannibal. It's just a guy. It's a very racist movie with just like, it's an adventure movie with like one bloody scene in it. And I'm just picturing people in 1980s UK smuggling this tape in and watching this banned movie and being super confused. I think Lisa or Axe was something similar, where someone would watch this and be sort of confused, even though there is there's not a lot of on-screen violence. A lot of the really gory stuff is left to our imaginations. It's still pretty bloody. I'm not going to say it's not bloody, but I can imagine people being sort of confused. Like you can watch Cannibal Holocaust and go, yeah, I see why this was banned. I get it. But there's all these movies that, like, I just imagine young people, like teenagers, who think they're so clever, sneaking something they're not allowed to see, and then it's something that just is not anywhere near what they were expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of this as having such a sustained melancholy tone and like deliberate pace that I think that
it's a haze. It's like a haze. It's like a brain fog of a movie.
Yeah,
it's like you're on too much medication.
I remember the first time I saw, because I didn't see it until I saw, was it Something Weird? Did they put out the DVD? I think that it was Something Weird, but
the original one, I believe, was Something Weird.
I'd seen it through Something Weird on DVD, and I just remember being really struck by just the kind of the funereal kind of pace of it. I mean, after the kind of like, kind of like more quick cutting in the initial crime stuff, it becomes like a more measured pace. And that soundtrack is also quite like just downbeat and sad. And I just remember being kind of struck with that side of it, like that for this film that's kind of suggesting a certain kind of gory axe murder kind of thing. Like it's not really the kind of film that you're dealing with. I mean, it has, those moments of violence, but they're in such short supply. If anything, I think the sexual violence is more disturbing in it. I mean, not just the what happens to Lisa, but what happens to the shopkeeper girl, the convenience store
girl. Who they humiliate.
It's not like a rape scene, but it's just uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that, and that's like the stuff that a lot of people remember about Last House. I think is the piss yourself is the thing that people remember. They don't remember the gutting as much, and I think that kind of humiliation actually has a stronger effect on people. Maybe because it strikes closer to home. We've seen that behavior. Yeah, that just being mean. Just being mean to somebody.
You're right. I think that's by far why that film was a hit, was the prolonged humiliation and torture of the girls in the woods, and that they got away with putting that in theaters. But Axe doesn't have that level of nastiness to it. Like it's I don't know. I mean, I think of this as a kind of a subdued film, even with the violence in it. Like I think well, let me ask you this: what do you think the dynamic is in that house? Because Stephen Thrower raises some interesting ideas in the review of it that he has in Nightmare USA. What is your take on that dynamic with Lisa and the grandfather?
It does Thrower. I don't remember this. Does Thrower imply that maybe that's not her grandfather and that she's like a drifter or something? Is that?
He seems to think the way he reads it, which I don't know if I see it this way, although I like his interpretation of it, was that he felt like, I mean, I don't know if we're spoiling things getting into
No, we can, this one I feel like we can, this is a popular enough, and this is available on Blu-ray with a double feature with Kidnap Coed, and it's
which
totally
is
worth it. It has great
really,
extras.
Really, it's, I think, a really like a necessary purchase if you're a fan of like low budget horror.
It's like, what is it? It's like your entire filmmaker's career in one box, basically.
Yeah, it's like the Minor Threat discography of horror.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, it's what he was saying was that he felt like it was implying that like maybe she was that like she turned the tables on like an unwanted advance by this character, and like he was almost kind of like a prisoner of hers. He
does look disturbed, doesn't he? I never really thought of it that way, but yeah, he does look like we don't really know what's wrong with him either.
It's funny
they
when
just say paralyzed.
Yeah, it's funny when you we talked about 5EZ pieces before, and I always conflate 5EZ pieces with the mute grandfather in the wheelchair. For some reason, I always conflate those fathers in my head with the silent wheelchair bound old men. But I don't know that that's anything that Friedel was thinking of at all with the father. I mean, I also think of the wheelchair bound creepy guy in Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Oh yeah.
But it's almost hard to I mean, there's only so much plot, and I feel like most of it's covered in that like brief synopsis on Letterboxd. Like it's a film more about atmosphere than it's about like a lot of story. Like Deathbed has more story in 10 minutes than all of that.
Deathbed has more story in like every breath of that poor ghost behind the illustration.
Yes. Yeah, because I always wonder if this one is too slow a burn for an exploitation kind of crowd. I mean, I don't know if that's why it didn't catch on in a bigger way when Harry Novak put it out, but I think now it kind of satisfies as just kind of perfect little nugget of North Carolina kind of eccentric quasi grindhouse kind of art movie.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought it was interesting, and it's so short. You just zip. It is slow moving, but it's slow moving in a way that it doesn't overstay its welcome.
Yeah. I would say
I had a quick note. You were talking about the music and something I noticed. I should say the music is George Newman Shaw and John Wilhelm. But I like the way, that's something I don't think I ever noticed before, is that when we're doing crime stuff with the guys, it's just a drum kit. Yeah. There's like almost no other music. And then as soon as we lock into Lisa's point of view, it's this like Moog and piano motif. And I never caught that it's just because it's part of the vibe. You don't really like separate these things, but that's something I noticed last time.
That reminds me of Dark August, because you have this almost kind of like proggy kind of energy to the opening, and then it's like it kind of intercut with this kind of like sustained feeling of dread and melancholy. With these kind of more kind of languid pieces that kind of set the tone. But and those guys both died tragically right after this film was made. Those musicians died in a car accident right after.
Oh, geez. I didn't know that. That sucks.
It's another tragedy. Like, you just don't know what they, I mean, this is like an early work for them. I mean, they could have done, and they were young people, but oh gosh, what was I going to say? Oh, just that, like, I would say that if anyone has seen this but hasn't seen Kidnapped Coed, I would say that's some kind of almost kind of minor miracle of an exploitation movie. Like, it's such a unusual, quirky, perfect little B movie. It really blows me away every time I go back to it. I was actually intending to rewatch it for this, even though I knew we weren't really talking about his other work, just X. But I would recommend that one even more than X if people haven't seen any Frederick Friedel.
I'm trying to think. I think of an easy way. That one's almost like The Getaway by the guy who made X. Is maybe how I describe it.
Yes. No. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like, unless you have like an innate revulsion with the Stockholm syndrome kind of,
right.
kidnap victim falling in love with the captor kind of conceit, which, I totally understand that. But I mean, I think that just all the details of it are so perfectly realized. I mean, I know that Friedel kind of is a little bit too modest about his own abilities. Like he jumped into that film so quickly that he feels like he made the same mistakes that he feels he made in Axe a second time. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it that way. I think I see kind of a development as a writer and as a filmmaker that, yeah, I don't know. It's a great what if, like what would have happened had he, been entrusted with funds to make more films at the time. He seemed like a really bright person. Like I don't need to go too much into his biography, but he came from like this kind of family of proteges, as far as like brilliant people. And he seemed like he was a young person when he made these movies. And like, he's one of the actors in this. I don't know if we said that, but he's the,
No, we didn't.
He's the junior character in this Last House kind of Trinity.
Yeah.
But he's the, the writer director and of these two movies. And yeah, I met him once in Philly, and he couldn't have been nicer. I mean, he did a Q&A with my late friend Travis Crawford after a double bill of these movies, and when Severin was putting them out. And unfortunately, the camera didn't record something properly, so that footage got junked. It was supposed to be on the Blu-ray, but I don't know if I have too much more to say about Axe, but other than I'm glad more people are discovering through the Nightmare USA and the Severin disc.
The only other note I had was part of me likes to compare it to, because they're both video nasties. I feel like this is the equal opposite of Robert Endelson's Fight for Your Life from 1977, which is another notorious video nasty about home invasion. But it's a completely different movie. It's about criminals home invading, but it's all racially charged and stuff. But it is frenetic, constantly frenetic crowd pleaser of a movie. It's a complete opposite of this sort of placid, esoteric little piece of weirdo filmmaking. So it's kind of, part of me, even though it's hard to watch Fight for Your Life because of all the racism, part of me wonders if they would make a weird double feature someday, if I just sat down and watched them both in a row and just these completely opposite takes on the same basic idea.
That is interesting. Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. And that's also a very post Last House kind of, rape revenge kind of home invasion movie. Yeah,
it's rough. It's rougher than this one. But speaking of rape revenge, next up is Death Game from 1977 by Peter S. Traynor. It is AKA The Seducers, which might be a better title in my mind. I think Death Game implies I don't know. That doesn't feel quite right. I like the title The Seducers a lot, but maybe The Seducers sounded too corny, so they didn't want to use it. I watched this because I got a review copy of the Eli Roth film Knock Knock, and I found out it was a remake, so I found a crappy VHS rip of it to watch first, because I was like, oh, this would be cool. It was co-produced by Sandra Locke and Colleen Camp, who were in the original. So I thought, this will be a cool thing. I can compare these two movies. And so I got this really wild late 70s. It's a horror movie, but it's way more than a horror movie. It's just like this hallucinatory attack of a movie. And then I was met with this really bland nothing of a movie from Roth. I haven't seen all of his movies. I kind of stopped after this one, but I was a pretty big Eli Roth fan, and I think Knock Knock is just the blandest, boringest thing he ever made. And it's especially crazy knowing how over the top it was, to the point where it almost feels like a proto Rob Zombie movie at points to me. Like, it feels like Rob Zombie was the one who should have remade the Death Game, not Eli Roth. It needed to be remade by someone with like more grotesque grit to him. It's hard to describe, but it has the same colorful, insane vibe that Zombie aims for all the time. And so it's kind of funny to think of it being sort of a prototype Rob Zombie joint, because Rob Zombie is doing impressions of insane filmmakers. And it turns out that this insurance salesman turned director is the actual insane filmmaker that Rob Zombie is pretending to be.
Yeah. Well, before we Before I jump in with you on this one, I mean, do you want to read your the letterbox?
Yeah, I'll read. This is what Letterboxd says. Letterboxd says, "Oops, this thing popped up." Letterboxd says George Manning is a well-to-do businessman, husband, and father. While his family is away on his birthday, he invites a pair of rain-soaked young women into his house to wait out the evening's thunderstorm. The two girls seduce Manning and ultimately kidnap and torture him in his own home. And I mean, that's most of the story. It's almost what's the word when we talk about like Brian De Palma and Dario Argento, the virtuoso. It's almost a virtuoso movie, but in an insane way. Like it has so much filmmaking thrown at it. You know, like Traynor made a couple more movies, I think. Yeah, he made at least 2 more movies.
Well, he made something that was incorporated into another film, but I'm pretty sure Death Game is the only thing that's completely his.
Yeah. And then he just went for, he went for broke. He got it all out of his system with this one, I feel.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was one that I bought it as the Seducers on a big, like a bigger box VHS, because I think I'd read about it in one of Danny Perry's books. And I was getting into Colleen Camp movies because of the Swinging Cheerleaders and something else. Maybe even They All Laughed, the Bogdanovich movie, but after she had gotten out of exploitation. But it was one that I was excited to finally see, and then it's just one of those B-movie gems that kind of lived up to my expectations and then some, as far as like from the opening kind of theme song, like My Old Dad, the with the Cockney
good old
accent.
Dad, yeah. It's like ragtime.
Yeah. To then it being like, the home invasion kind of thriller. And even then, this was one of those movies like Messiah of Evil where you could only see it in pan and scan for decades. So that I never saw it in widescreen until Grindhouse releasing, undertook the restoration. But I've always loved this movie. I think what we're getting to now in the last couple of films we're going to talk about are films that have some higher degree of like pedigree as far as the casts for these films. I mean, Death Game, has Seymour Cassel, who had been an Oscar nominee for John Cassavetes' Faces, and it has Sandra Locke, who is an Oscar winner, I think, for The Heart is Lonely to Hunter. Is it winner or nominee? I can't remember, but
I can't remember either. But she was Eastwood's.
But this is before her Eastwood connection,
and this was before the Eastwood connection when she starts showing up in all his movies.
Yeah, I think her star kind of arose through the Eastwood connection after she made this. But
Cassell also, I should say, plays the dad in Rushmore. That was the thing I always remember him from.
Oh, see?
Yeah. Anyway, go on.
She was nominated for an Oscar for Heart.
Nominated.
But I think that this as a home invasion kind of thriller. I mean, it starts off like sexploitation to the degree that it has like a bam chicka wow wow kind of like
I mean, it's
under the hot tub like menage a trois scene. Like it feels like it's going to be softcore.
It's pretty good softcore too. I don't mean to get gross here, but like it's a pretty sexy scene, and it's done in a pretty classy way. Like it's a scene that catches you off guard, knowing what this movie is going to become.
Yes.
Like if I would have just wandered into a theater and watched it, I would have gone, "Oh, I know what's happening here," and then been totally fucked up and scared at the end.
Yes. Well, it helps the fact that Sandra Locke and Colleen Camp are like genuinely talented actresses, so that when it gets dark, it goes step by step into increasingly threatening, crazy behavior, and it all works. Like it becomes kind of like a and this is another one that feels like it could be a play. I mean, it's all kind of concentrated on that one location, other than like a quick drive in the car. It's for the most part all concentrated on that one space. So it could it could probably translate to a very violent stage show. It's got like a Euro cult kind of feel in places because due to a clash with the director, Cassell didn't loop any of his dialogue. So it's all got this kind of hollow looped kind of sound to it, even though it's all English language in both versions. And since we talk about softcore, I would say that this story has been told many times, and Knock Knock is the only other one that does not have a strong sexual component. And that, I mean, I can't remember. I think it does have like, kind of a sex scene. But I mean, because there was another film that came out before this called Little Miss Innocence that Vinegar Syndrome put it out on DVD.
They added it.
And it's on the
Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's on the Grindhouse release as well, which is the same exact story. And I'm not sure if anyone knows how exactly that happened. Because I don't think it was them trying to rip off this earlier film. I think it was maybe someone leaked the story to somebody. Because they always claimed that this story was based on a real situation that happened, but like taken to an exaggerated kind of, direction. Like, I guess a guy took a woman home and then she just stayed and became like a nuisance. And then he just took this into like a psycho thriller kind of territory. Like it wasn't.
And that's more what that other movie does. It's a much longer story. The other one. This is all like one night. Death Game is all like one night. There's also one, a Spanish one called Vicious and Nude.
Yes.
That is Manuel Estebas. I have not seen that one either.
Yeah, I found it, and I meant to watch it before we recorded. I actually meant to watch. There was also Little Miss Innocence, the porn version from the 80s, and then there's also Knock Knock. So it's a story that's been told more than any of the others we're talking about. I know a few of these films have remakes, but this one has been remade a lot. But I don't think any of the ones I've seen really kind of rival Death Game. Just as one kind of just small aside, when one thing we didn't comment on in Pigs that I've always kind of been struck by is when she puts on the exaggerated makeup in the mirror. That's like kind of femininity, like taken to like almost like a kabuki clown kind of territory. And I think about Death Game when I think about films that do that. There's a few films that do that. I think Wild at Heart also does that and a few others. But there's something really kind of alarming when the girls in Death Game start applying the makeup and become kind of like monstrous versions of femininity.
Sandra Locke is especially frightening in this movie, I think. I think that she's the slightly more mature of the two young women.
Yeah.
She's more directly threatening.
Just as an aside, I find that when people criticize Death Game, I've seen a lot of guys write that it doesn't work for them because Sandra Locke is too old to be a 15-year-old girl or whatever age that character says she is.
Right.
But A, I don't think she looks too old, but B, they could be lying about their ages. Like, it's not a really important detail for that to hang.
No, I mean, they could be lying about everything. It's implied that like they give their reason for what they're doing. And it is sort of a roundabout rape revenge movie where it has to do with, now I'm trying to remember, I've forgotten, it's that they were brutalized by their fathers or something. I can't quite remember now.
Yeah.
What the backstory is. But it's a roundabout rape revenge thing where like it's like Miss 45, or a movie that it really reminds me of is Hard Candy.
Oh,
where she's sort of a vigilante rape revenge artist, and she also breaks into the house and keeps him hostage for a whole night and does stuff to him.
Well, yeah, and I would say, I mean, this is not one of the more progressive. I mean, this is quite honestly. This
is women are crazy, and you should be afraid of crazy women. Not men should not do. Like, they don't really do a lot with the fact that these are abused girls.
No, and if anything, they are also equating lesbianism with psychotic behavior, which the next film will also be doing. So there's things to that raise an eyebrow, for us, but it's not like a major plot point in either film to my mind, but that is buried in there, speaking to prejudices that would have existed at the time. But where is that set in San Francisco? So I don't know if that, how much they're really kind of. I mean, I feel like reviews at the time really kind of harped on that with both of these films, this and Mafu Cage. But it's not something I ever really thought of, when watching them. I find it a grueling film because it is like a prolonged torture film in the second half of it, but
and it's so much muck. Like, it's like not just physical torture, but it's like throwing things at him and just covering him in so much crap that he's not even recognizably human anymore. It's like, and then they're covered in makeup and they're layering clothes and they're breaking all his stuff. It's so much. And also his house is really hideous 70s things.
Yeah.
It kind of plays into it too. He has like a goldfish goldfish aquarium, but it's his coffee table, I think.
Right.
It's like some horrible thing that you'd only have in the mid 70s.
Well, it's funny because it before it turns into like a psycho threatening kind of situation, it becomes kind of like the Lolita thing turned on its head, because it when they come in out of the rain at night, and there are these, kind of sexy Coed type characters or whatever, it becomes like a male fantasy. But then the morning after, when he's got to really deal with like the reality of this, they're like kind of like infantilized in some ways, as far as like they are messy with their food and they're just full of inane chatter. And like you get a sense of just how young and immature they are. And like, I don't know, like it's like a cringy drama situation before it turns into psycho territory that I think is kind of interesting also. Like I don't know that it really it punishes that character for statutory rape, but it's like, I don't know that it like
it might say that this would have been cool if they hadn't spent the night, might be at the film's stance.
Yeah,
on
like
that.
it's borderline like trying to have the message that a film like Hard Candy would have.
Right.
I mean, same as going back to the Death by Invitation. Like it's commenting on like boorish male behavior, but it's not trying to alienate those guys 100% either.
Right. Another movie that I would compare it to that might surprise some listeners is I think Takeshi Miike's Audition has some connections here with how that character is dealing with things that's like the much more low key version of what's happening here. Just another story about a woman who has been abused that is then putting herself in a situation to attack an abuser who is a different person.
That's funny. I thought of Audition actually with Axe, because before they changed the title, that was another film that was like a bait and switch as far as the kind of story you think you're getting, and then it goes in a totally different direction. But you never get that when you see the poster art and the title, and everyone goes into Audition expecting a horror film, but that's one of those, like, if you could erase your brain and watch something for the first time, I think Audition would be on that list. Yeah, I never had that experience. Side note, I think I have one friend that doesn't know that film that I'm going to show it to them without telling them what it is and just see what happens. Because
it's a reasonable romantic drama for almost an hour. Like it's a little off kilter, but I mean, there's not a lot to say what's going to happen. Early in it would be interesting.
Whereas Death Game, I don't know that it really kind of suggests from the outset the threat that those girls are. I mean, but they show up kind of like vampires in the night, so you kind of get a little bit more of a.
I think the opening titles with the crayon drawings and the weird song, and then I think that's really setting you up for something is wrong right off the bat.
Yeah, no.
You just don't know what's wrong, but there's something bad happening.
Yes, but even the way, I mean, that music and like the way that they kind of dance around in like the top hat and everything, like there's something that's very, I don't know. I mean, even more than some like Fun or Heavenly Creatures or like films that come later that deal with like girlfriends and murder. Like it's not like this one is like a lot more playfully naughty and exploitation movie kind of, but I don't know, because I can't tell how much the ambitions were higher with that cast.
Yeah,
because those were not B movie people. So again, like with Mafu Cage, like I don't know if they imagined something less trashy or not. But I love that it's a smart, well acted, trashy movie.
Yeah, and it looks fantastic. I mean, really visually appealing movie. It's great that it has a nice Blu-ray.
Finally,
it's so colorful.
Yeah, no, that's a film that I agree that's a film that never looked like $1 million until recently, and it's amazing now. And well, isn't the production design that's not Jack Fisk, is it?
Yeah, Jack Fisk.
Okay, so again,
and Peter Jameson.
Wait, what's that?
Peter Jameson and Jack Fisk are the two.
So Jack Fisk, Messiah of Evil, and of course the Malick and Lynch and everything that comes later. So Killers of the Flower Moon.
I was gonna say he just did Killers of the Flower Moon, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think Bill Paxton and Sissy Spacek might have also been on that set doing crew work under him. So
Sissy Spacek, the set decorator. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just on the production design level, it's pulling from a lot of like people that have A-list credits, on their resume. Like we put this alongside things like Pigs and My Brother Has Bad Dreams, and it's like there's a different caliber of experience on a project like this. Even though this is the first film that Peter Traynor made, it's like there's a lot of people that have some honed skills at this point. Not to dismiss the other films we were talking about earlier. I love those, but I mean, it's just there's a different kind of thing happening with this one.
It worked out nicely doing them in release order for this reason. Or what I thought was the release order. Apparently, I got it off.
I think it's close enough. And then this is one that also, came out as The Seducers. And I don't know that it ever really circulated as Mrs. Manning's Weekend or any of the working titles. I think it's always been Death Game and then The Seducers. But I don't know. I mean, it used to make me crazy when Knock Knock was the one that you could see, and then the Death Game was something that you would find a pan and scan VHS transfer from the the early 80s is the only way you could see it. Was it you the one that raised the rumor that Knock Knock could have been directed by someone else, and then Eli Roth took credit to help it because his wife was in it?
Yeah, there was a rumor of that, and I don't remember who was rumored to have directed. It was someone else who hadn't directed a lot, I think.
I've still never heard that to be true, and I know that Colleen Camp and Eli Roth do the commentary on the Blu-ray, and so he talks about it like he made it. So maybe. Yeah,
I mean, it might have just been. I mean, he was. It was a weird time where he had already made his cannibal movie, and it was just stuck in limbo. So that on video, Knock Knock actually came out the week before. I can't remember the name of the cannibal
Green
movie
Inferno.
now.
Yeah, no, I know
Green
they
Inferno.
came out like within weeks of each other.
I did a double feature. Like I was in a rush that was when I was really focused on reviewing everything they sent me. So I just did it as a double feature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, so maybe people would know this story if they know Knock Knock, because I know Knock Knock, Keanu Reeves, it was on Netflix. It was probably pretty easy to see it. And Eli Roth was coming off of, Hostel and Hostel 2 and Green Inferno, and so maybe he still had some momentum with his other movies. And but I would say even if you didn't like Knock Knock, that this is such a much more atmospheric and eerie movie that I think even if you know all the plot beats, it's still quite compelling. I can't say that. What's the Spanish one? Is it
Nude, Vicious and Nude?
Vicious and Nude. Like I don't know if Vicious and Nude quite has the same atmosphere, but Little Miss Innocence, the '73 version, is kind of.
It's upsetting. It's a very slow burn, and it's an upsetting movie.
Yeah, it's pretty potent in its own right. Like I don't want people to just dismiss that as like some kind of just cheap softcore film that has the kernel of a great movie. It's a pretty strong little movie in its own right.
It's from that weird point in time when you could have a softcore porn that was definitely a softcore porn, but then would also like, well, now that sex is over, we can have this difficult discussion and be kind of sad and disturbing and violent.
Yes. No, it's great. I mean, I never heard of it until Vinegar Syndrome put that out. And then I was so happy when it got, ported over to that Death Game Blu-ray, because it's an interesting little co-feature. You want to hit the last one?
Yeah, last one here. And it, like you said, it's Mafu Cage, 1978. Yeah, that's right. There was one more woman, Karen Arthur. This is based on a play by Eric Westphal called You and Your Clouds, which I don't know about the play, but I can, like you were saying, a lot of these either could be plays, were plays, or were eventually turned into plays.
Yeah, and this was actually filmed as Clouds. I mean, I don't know that it ever came out under that title, but I mean,
that wouldn't be a great title for this particular movie. You and Your Clouds might have worked. Yeah. But just Clouds wouldn't have been descriptive enough. This is described as two strange sisters live in a crumbling mansion where they keep a pet ape, which belonged to their late father, locked up in a cage. Well, one of the sisters seems to be keeping her head straight, as it were. The other appears to be sinking further and further into barbarism and insanity. That's a pretty decent description. This is starring some pretty big... I mean, this is Carol Kane is... the insane person, and Lee Grant is her sister.
And they're both coming off of substantial, successful films. I mean, Lee Grant had won an Oscar for Shampoo. Carol Kane had just come off of Hester Street, the Joan Micklin Silver film that was also an Oscar-nominated performance. So, pretty pretty heavy talent for.
I think this was supposed to be like not necessarily an Oscar bait movie, but this was supposed to be a well received, like thoughtful, critically acclaimed. It was made to be critically acclaimed, I think.
Karen Arthur had made a film called Legacy, and so Legacy is this kind of odd one-woman show, kind of stage piece converted into a feature film about this kind of middle-class woman kind of slowly having a mental breakdown. It has a similar element to Mafu Cage in that it's like kind of largely set in one location, has a neurotic woman as the central character. It has a stage play origin, because I think that Karen Arthur came from a theater background and was kind of trying to work her way into film. Ultimately, she became this mega prolific television director, but these two independent films kind of like set the stage for her making that transition into television. I think she only has, unless I'm forgetting, she only has one other theatrical film, Lady Beware with Diane Lane. But I think that the Mafu Cage, I think it had some festival kind of appearances, but again, like I think critics didn't quite understand it when it came out.
I could see this being a movie that ruined someone's career because it's so strange and hard to clamp down that I could see this getting terrible reviews. But I think it was made to. I don't think it was made to be an exploitation movie at all. No. I think it was made to please critics, and that I can imagine it being just savaged. Because it's so strange and it's so melodramatic. It's just strange in ways that critics at the time wouldn't have liked, I don't think, except the other was, the mainstream critics at least.
No, well, I mean, I think that what I understand is Legacy got attacked for being too melodramatic and devoid of humor and too kind of maybe earnest, and I think that Mafu Cage has a little bit of humor, but it's a very abrasive movie in places, and it has a lot in common tonally with it, with Legacy. But it is more of a horror film. I mean, I thought of a lot of different things. I mean, I thought of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, maybe as being an influence, but I also even thought of like when they're burying the monkey of Sunset Boulevard, and like that, that same kind of like Hollywood neurotic mad woman in a modern castle of sorts. But I mean, it's not it's like Death Game in reverse in some ways. And again, like that like I said earlier, like that kind of unfortunate kind of tying like homosexuality with psychotic behavior, which I always forget that's even an element of Mafu Cage because it's such it's barely.
I mean, it's tied to the incest at certain points too, though.
Yes,
right. So I think that's how you get away with it in a modern thing. Is like, oh no, it's not about lesbians, it's about incest, but it's not really what's going on.
Yeah, and again that brings us back to My Brother Has Bad Dreams territory a little bit too. But I mean, but even more. But maybe more reciprocated in this version, I mean, than that. But it's funny, both books that we talked about, Nightmare USA and Kayla's House of Psychotic Women, both write about this film. And so I think I saw this on VHS after reading about it in those books. So I already knew going into it that it was going to have like a neurotic woman horror element. But
I saw it with having not put together, and I had read those books, and I just didn't put it together what it was. I saw it at the Chicago's Music Box of Horrors 24-hour horror festival.
Oh man,
it was like the third movie, and it was it shut everybody up. Basically, is the best way I can put it. Like the audience was really upset by it. I can't remember what it followed. I think it followed up Lord of Illusions. And it was like you going from that to this was just it was weird, and like it really upset me, and I was like, ugh, I need to get away from this. Like I shouldn't. I don't want to be like the guy who says, like the classic Gen X bullshit where they like you couldn't make this movie today. I think you shouldn't make this movie today. But there's a lot about it. So there's not just the lesbianism equals insanity, but there's a blackface scene. I think that the blackface and the cultural appropriation is part of the theming, though. That,
no, I mean, I think the blackface scene in this is like the blackface scene in Antonioni's L'Eclisse. Like, it's not like it's mocking that character for their appropriation. Like, it's not like.
Right. She's taking this whole their father was this sort of anthropologist type, and she has taken it super to heart, and so the whole house is full of this stuff. So their whole life growing up was cultural appropriation, is what it sort of comes down to.
Yes, yeah. No, this isn't the jazz singer. I mean, this is this is about cultural appropriation, and it's funny because like I was thinking about that in relation to Ganja and Hess. Because Ganja and Hess is also about like someone's kind of fascination with certain cultures and having all these kind of artifacts and trinkets all around the house. But I mean, it's used for different purposes, but they're in both cases tourists from the outside. You know, but and you know, we read them differently because of race. I think in this one, I mean, that is an uncomfortable element then, and it's, I mean, you would never make that film now, probably.
Right. I mean, just don't make it. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, but I think also even just the use of a live animal in that context too would also probably alarm people.
That was, listen, I have a little list of things you can't do anymore. So yeah, you torture. You have a live animal. The ape is killed, and it's very shocking, but it's killed in a way that they didn't hurt the ape.
No, it's not like having the Holocaust or something.
Right. But we do know now, with the knowledge we have, that being on film set is basically torture for a great ape. That that we know this was bad. This was bad of them to do, no matter how good their intentions were and how much they tried to protect the ape physically. It was probably very sad. And you just have a CG ape now. That's why we have CG apes and everything, because that it's easier, and also we know it's not great for them. And the other thing is, it's a very, very bad representation of mental illness, because Sissy, the character that Carol Kane plays, and she is fantastic in this movie. She is super good, in a really grating way, though. Like, it's hard to play. But the thing that she's like, something these days that, you know, your armchair psychiatrist would say that she is spectrum, because she's obsessed with very specific things. But it does the old trope where the mentally ill person, the obsessive person, is dangerous.
Yes.
Which is something we try not to do in movies anymore, because it has real life it has real life damage to actual mentally ill people. But it's interesting, like, looking past all that, it's interesting how she is very clearly the antagonist of this story, which is a sort of turnaround from someone like Norman Bates, who is a sympathetic character who we also know is suffering mental illness, and it makes him dangerous. But as an audience, we sort of support him in a lot of what he does. And that was the more common thing you would see. You'd either see, like in the 80s, you have slasher movies about insane people who just kill people. But it seemed like at the time, it was a lot more sympathetic views of mental illness. Whereas this movie is not very sympathetic to mental illness. And a lot of it is just because this movie knows that you can't leave someone that is this mentally ill in this situation without help. You can't make it her sister's responsibility. It's not the way we should do things. And the movie knows that. And that's really where the drama comes out, is that the normal sister has let this ruin her entire life because she doesn't know what else to do about it.
Right. Well, she doesn't want to put her sister in a cage the way Sissy puts her Mafu in a cage.
Right. And so it's not that the movie thinks it's okay to say these people are violent. The movie is definitely saying this is a situation where someone will become violent. But I think that from modern eyes, that doesn't look great. Right. So I just want to be very clear with listeners to watch this. There are things in this movie that are not cool anymore.
It got attacked when it came out. I mean, when it played San Francisco, I mean, you have to understand, like, Karen Arthur was like, the few people that did know her at the time would have saw her as, like, you know, a feminist director, like a woman director. And so for her to make a film that has, like, sort of the lesbian implication, like, you know, I think in San Francisco, like, you know, people were not cool with that. I think that, like, she was surprised to get some pushback then. I mean, you know, from progressive corners with that film. I mean, I don't know that it would have had that like impact on a larger scale had it played on a larger platform. Because I think that critics were a little bit reluctant. I mean, it got some good reviews, but for the most part, I think people were like a little bit afraid of that film. And I think that without critical support, it kind of became one of those films that got like a series of retitlings. I mean, it was released as Don't Ring the Doorbell. It was released as The Cage, Deviation. Even My Sister, My Love, I think was one of the titles. So it it played up the horror element. It played up the incest element. It played up the cage element. Like Deviation, I think, was the title of a La Raz film. Like, I mean, it has like the exploitation hard sell after it doesn't catch on as the Mafu Cage. And, you know, I think that it's kind of been rehabilitated in recent years through Thrower and Kayla kind of writing about it. So I feel like it's kind of picked up more of an interest in recent years. I don't know. I know.
I mean, why would it be? I mean, the Music Box of Horror, the guy went out of his way to get a 35 millimeter cut of it. So yeah, it clearly got some sort of momentum.
I think I told you when maybe I told you when we did the last episode, the Witch Who Came from the Sea, I saw in a marathon like that, and that really kind of shut up the audience in a big way, because I always forget that film has so much potentially disturbing content because of the way that it deals with abuse. But yeah, I think that the Mafu Cage would be even more of a buzzkill in that kind of marathon environment than Witch Who Came from the Sea.
I keep comparing these to made for TV stuff. So like, you know, soap operas, and I compared Deathbed to like Sesame Street. For me, this reminded me of those sort of daytime TV movies and after school specials that were supposed to teach a social lesson, but also feel kind of exploitative. The one that I remember seeing being homesick from school is there's a Patty Duke one called Cries from the Heart from the 90s. That kind of thing sort of morphed into Lifetime and Hallmark originals after that. But this kind of feels like one of those proto Lifetime originals that just is too deranged to be a Lifetime original. Like it goes off the rails at a certain point. And it's funny that I never knew it was based on a play before, because now that element of it totally makes sense too. But so it does feel like a sort of staged play. Like there's scenes where they show the outside sometime, but a lot of times Lee Grant is just coming from off screen into the room. Like so much of the movie takes place in that one room.
Yeah, which is and the room. I mean, it feels so designed with like the white walls and everything. Like it feels like slightly stylized and like, you know, beyond all the artwork and such around them. It ties to things like The Bride, also like the deranged mind of the neurotic woman kind of coming out through what they create. And you know, I think it's a really powerful movie. It's not a pleasant film to rewatch, so I don't check in with it a lot, but every time I do see it, it still has the same power for me. But yeah, it is a difficult character to hang out with.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also really sad. It's a really tragic movie. There's not a lot of fun to be had.
Yeah, I find it to be the most difficult watch of the films that we've talked about today. But I mean, I think it succeeds at what it's trying to do. I think the reservations you raise are valid, but I think that it's you know, I think people, you know, might want to know about that going into it if they haven't seen it. But I do think that it in terms of like a powerful film that is not an easy one to shake off, I think that this one really does have a lot of strength to it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to watch the version that doesn't have the power behind it, I recommend the Ovidio Assantes' Madhouse, which is like the evil sister story, but the fun version of it.
Yeah, no. I mean, this one, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's like Ken Russell or Zhivovsky or that kind of level of hysteria, but it's like... it's on the road to things like that. I mean, and if you know Carol Kane mostly from like comedy, it's really kind of a testament to how menacing she could be.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of other examples of that. She's usually tragic or funny characters.
Yeah, and like Death Game, it's like when she applies the makeup, not the blackface type makeup, but like the other makeup, like the exaggerated kind of
Her eyes are already huge.
Yeah, the ceremony, like the ceremonial kind of makeup. I mean, it is like Death Game, and it just makes her more of like a monster.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, I think it has a real, like I said, like a real power to it. But it is like an offbeat kind of quality. I mean, this from the soundtrack on, it's like all the kind of like I don't know if that's like just like mimicking African music or anything authentic. I don't know too much about the score behind it, but it strikes a tone that is pretty unique. And this is another one of the California movies, but I don't know if we can say that they all have a consistent tone or look. Was it John Bailey? Do you have the director of photography? It's
cinematography. Yep, John Bailey.
Yeah, because it's the husband and wife. Because the woman is it Carol Littleton? There was a husband and wife team that was the DP and the editor on this.
Carol Littleton, yep, editor, yep.
Yeah, they did a couple of films together, but this was like an early credit of theirs. But,
it looks like they worked with Paul Schrader.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, but he shoot like hardcore.
Miss.
Oh, did he shoot like American Gigolo?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Cat People.
Yeah, Michael Chapman shot hardcore. But so like they again like the technical credits are people that have some industry studio film credits that you'd know. I guess in that way it's also kind of like Messiah of Evil. It's like a lot of people that are making this low budget exploitation-y kind of movie, but that had ambitions to greater things, and a lot of them succeeded in the business. I mean, that's also the thing with California versus like the kind of East Coast regional oddities that we, like someone like Frederick Friedel is like working in total isolation in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're like, these are people.
Yeah, I was going to say North Carolina even more so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are people that are working with like AFI grants and such. I mean, they're like part of the, the system in a way, but this was still like a legitimate independent film that, ran into all the same challenges that women directed independent films faced at that point. I mean, regardless of whether or not they were genre films. I mean, unfortunately, it's like, whether it's her or I mean, she had a little bit more luck than was it Christina Hornisher? I mean, Karen Arthur had a long career. It was
just a little different.
It was just a little different. I mean,
she did the Jackson American Family movie that was a TV movie that is I always remember like 1990s, early 90s.
Oh, was she? I think was she one of the directors on Rich Man, Poor Man? But
she did a lot of Seventh Heaven.
Okay.
Judging Amy. Yeah, I'm still Cagney and Lacey. 80 episodes of Cagney and Lacey. Rich Man, Poor Man, Book 2, 1 episode.
Okay.
Just before this, actually. Well, before this was released. I don't know when it was actually shot.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, I was thinking about someone like David Green, who directed some of the original Rich Man, Poor Man. He was somebody that had some theatrical films like Godspell and People Next Door, I Start Counting, but became like a giant figure in television. And just sometimes people have like an aptitude for that format. And it's a totally different set of challenges. Maybe not the field to, or the medium to best make personal stories as an artist, but I mean, it is a living. It is, I don't know, because they talk about like, her being relegated to TV and some stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, that's still a great living.
Yeah. I mean, Jackson's An American Story is one of the most seen television movie. It's one of the most seen movies of all time because everybody watched it when it was on, and it still played on VH1 for years. So yeah, it's not like no one's seeing what she did.
As a final summing up film of the ones we talked about, I mean, that's a strong little movie.
Strong send off. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess before we leave, do you have any socials that you or any sort of upcoming projects you want to tell people about, or is everything you do secret?
Everything I do is secret.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I would just say that the Vinegar Syndrome Lost Picture Show box set has a film called Las Vegas Strangler that Amanda Reyes and I did a commentary for. That's pretty great collection. I mean, beyond that film, it's got a lot of films that were previously thought to be lost, and they've been kind of restored for this great release. Has a lot of great people doing the booklet essays like Stephen Thrower and Sam Deegan and Heather Drain, people like that. And then the Fatal Games slasher movie. I mean, there's definitely some problematic elements in that one, but it's we talk about them on the commentary.
Yeah, well, slasher movies, you got to expect that.
Yeah,
depending on their age.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to spoil the ending of it, but
yeah, I haven't actually seen it at all. So looking forward to that.
But that's
and people keeping out for that Messiah Evil. Like we said, his Bill's essay is in the non-limited edition as well, and it's definitely a must-own disc. For people who collect.
I mean, really proud to be involved with that. I think since last time we talked, I was on 2 films that we talked about, because I also wound up on the 101 Films release of Death Dream, which was rendered obsolete days later by Blue Underground announcing a 4K edition that was in the works. So, what can you do?
well.
But yeah, still happy to be on that as well. If anyone wants to hear me on it, I think it's still in print. But I guess that's what I'm working on. I'll be on a director's club that I'm recording soon with Jim Laskaski and Patrick Rapol on the films of 2023. So,
okay, wrap up.
Nice long talk. I mean, longer than this talk even.
I would be worthless on that. I did not catch I don't think I saw a single movie in theaters all year. I think I watched them all at home. I was just so busy with reviews and stuff, and I haven't watched new stuff.
Yeah.
So I'd be worthless on that.
I might be worthless on it, and I saw plenty. So we'll see. Yeah.
All right. Well, I can be reached as usual on the Genre Grinder Facebook, on the Genre Grinder Twitter, at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter. I have a Blue Sky account now that's under Gabe Powers. I have a Instagram under Genre Grinder Gabe. And I forgot to mention last podcast that I do have a Patreon under Genre Grinder, and I thank you to everybody who's given money to that. And that's about it. This was a long discussion, and this is definitely going to be 2 parts. So if you're listening to this, you probably heard the first part, and I just sort of ended it with something similar. But it made it so I could use both those awesome songs. So talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
Somebody's waiting for you.